So the third example that we have is rioting. So, man, I mean, since the killing of George Floyd, there has been not only a national but also global kind of movement, awareness, and manifestations, protests, to the end of calling attention to racial injustice, police brutality, and things like justice being carried out.
Sure.
Now, a lot of these manifestations have had examples or have also had riots along with them. And so with something like property destruction, looting, things like that, the question becomes then, in the grand scheme of things, is this lawful?
Right.
The question becomes, hey, where we clearly have established laws of not destroying people's property or not like theft, is how do we understand rioting from a Christian perspective with reference to the social situation of racial injustice?
Yeah, so the first thing that we do is we make the distinction between something being lawful and something being ethical, right? And so in the position that would kind of validate or maybe just accept, not necessarily validate, but be understanding of or charitable towards rioting. The idea is there's this valid manifestation between protests as peaceful kind of displays against injustice and rioting as violent manifestations of anger against injustice, right? Yeah. And so the distinction here highlights the depth of the disease, and really this is what we're talking about. When the line of thinking here is that if you care more about property than the fact that you do, people being killed or poor policing habits, whatever the kind of discussion is, then your priorities are misaligned, right? Because yes, nobody likes property damage. Nobody's like, hooray, pro mom and pop shop being burned to the ground or whatever. Yeah. People are pro like, hooray, City Hall being burned to the ground, like targeted acts of violence and demonstration against governmental property.
That seems to be a separate issue though.
Yeah, all right, I mean, whatever, that's cool. But it's like when you burn down somebody's mom and pop shop or whatever, right? That's a different story in its entirety.
You're doing some real harm to somebody's finances.
Who probably agrees with your cause, right? Or who probably is sympathetic to it. And so the question becomes, right, if you are so stuck in that part where you can't see the bigger issue at play, right? You're losing the forest for the trees, as it were. And so when you get so stuck on the idea that you can only see the discussion of like, man, you can't be burning down people's property, as opposed to like, hey, another unarmed person was just shot and murdered by the police, or whatever the idea is. The concept here is it's being hypocritical, right? That it's, until that discussion can see that bodies are more valuable than property, right? In the American case, particularly like black bodies and black people are more valuable than whatever shop, the idea becomes of destruction of property is both moot and hypocritical. And so, we kind of see this in the language of Malcolm X, early Malcolm X, right? Like by any means necessary, like when he was younger there, or even, Martin Luther King, who himself not an advocate for property damage, still was one to make the distinction of saying rioting is the language of the unheard, right? And so these people...
Didn't he condemn rioting, though?
Yeah. So he would have said that rioting itself is not a good thing, right? That's why he was nonviolent in his protests there. But the idea that it still exists is something that we have to be aware of the larger picture of saying, until we deal with the issues at hand, these types of things are not going to stop there, because there's anger and there's nowhere else to channel it sometimes there, so...
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that I kind of heard as you were speaking is almost this dichotomy, right? Of, well, what's more important? Is it property or is it people? Now, this is what's really interesting to me. And most of my circles are pretty conservative. So I'm a lot, on my feed, on my posts, a lot of the people I talk to are saying, on the one hand, listen, we understand that there is racism out there and we don't want racism. We just don't think that two wrongs make a right. And so what's interesting to me is, so is there some validity to that in terms of, do we have to say, are they being hypocritical? Or, no, that kind of makes sense.
Sure.
So from this perspective, right, from that perspective, there's a fundamental difference, not only in the forest and the trees, but in the nature of the acts.
Yeah, for sure.
Of peaceful protesting or civil disobedience, if that may be the case, as an American right, and the destruction of property as unlawful and therefore evil or sinful behavior.
Sure.
I remember having this one conversation with a friend, and the way that he broke this down, as we were saying, as we were talking and discussing this, is if we are willing to grant or to concede even something like, this is just the symptom, we should be concerned with the disease.
Yeah.
He said, well, if that's the perspective you want to take, then you have to grant at some level that it's sometimes okay,
Yeah.
or that it's sometimes not evil,
Right.
or that it's sometimes righteous anger.
Right,
And he's saying, if you do that, well, how are you logically consistent then? So that's interesting, because what seems to be the concern then from this perspective is the consistency, or like the logical clarity of saying, no, if something is bad, it's bad all the time, no matter the circumstance. So it's never okay to burn down a car, somebody else's car.
Yeah.
Right? So that's interesting, because you could make a case for those two things from a biblical standpoint, I suppose. And another thing I really see too is people, posting memes or saying, well, MLK condemned riots. And so these people are taking MLK's name and they're distorting his message by going out there and rioting. And man, what's really crazy is everybody's like an expert in MLK now.
Sure.
And interpreting him and understanding him. And so it just kind of hits home how tragic it is that, we don't have him to speak for himself at this point, right?
Sure.
But those are the two perspectives on that. And so as we kind of head to some conclusions here, what I really find to be at the fundamental logical level of these conversations is, what's more valuable? Is it the Christian way of doing things in reference to the government, or is it getting Christian things done?
Yeah. So on that one hand, right, if getting society to look more Christian is preferred, then using the government as kind of a blunt object, right, to implement whatever Christian values are for you, then we have to commit to electing those officials to make that a thing, right? We have to get people to overturn Roe v. Wade or defund Planned Parenthood or bring prayer back to schools, et cetera. But if it's the other way, then it's a different conversation entirely.
Correct. So, like you said, if on the one hand, just getting Christian things done, if looking society to look more Christian is the end goal with reference to government, well, then you can bite the bullet and vote for somebody who isn't a Christian, or vote for somebody that maybe you don't agree with on certain things, because he's going to get Christian things done.
Sure.
Right? On the other hand, however, though, if the end goal or the reference, the orientation of the church's relationship to government isn't just to get Christian things done, but to live in a Christian way, then you have a difference. And this is what I find fascinating. There's a theologian by the name of Cornelius Van Til, right? Super intense name. I want you guys to look him up. Dutch theologian in the 20th century. He wrote in the 1900s. And he came from this perspective. He said, listen, the end goal isn't just to make society Christian. It's for the new society of God, which is the church, to live in such a way and to model Christianity in such a way where it's winsome, where we're less concerned with wielding the club of government to get things done than showing why Christianity is preferred over other views, and how actually everybody flourishes if society, if the church wanted the benefit of all. Now, granted, that gets real tricky, right? Because at some point you have to stand up and say, like, no, we shouldn't approve of some things.
Right.
But part of this messiness is where we need a little deeper thinking about it. With grace, with charity, with love of neighbor. But these are people who really love Jesus, but really disagree on these things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.